Hello, I'm Tristan Brand. This is number 0674, the Stuff File program with Peter Anthony Holder, and it comes to you right now.
The following program is brought to you in living color.
Now, it's time for an eclectic mix of interviews and some of the oddest news stories you'll ever hear. It's the Stuff File program with Peter Anthony Holder.
Hey there, hi there, ho there! Peter Anthony Holder here with you, and yes, this is indeed another edition of the Stuff File program, number 0674. And coming up on this edition of the Stuff File program, BBC foreign correspondent and thriller writer Humphrey Hawksley is back to talk about his latest novel. This one is called Ice Islands. It's the stuff that comes across his desk as a journalist that helps him to fuel his career as a best-selling thriller novelist.
I tend to come up with ideas for the thrillers of something that's sort of crossed my desk, and I'm never been quite sure what to do it journalistically. And then I will say, well, let's look into this a bit further. I mean, maybe there's some truth in it. Maybe there's a fictional story that can be done out of it. It's anchored in credibility, because I do geopolitical, espionage, military type of thrillers, so there's got to be a credibility attached to it.
Frances Jones is the author of Overcoming the Emotional Stigmas of Infertility, Barren But Not Ashamed. It's a topic that is very personal to her, as she has dealt with some of the things that even well-meaning people might say.
When my husband and I first married, he had a 4.5-year-old daughter. So when I married him, I became an instant full-time mom. Our first Mother's Day, I'm all excited. We're at church. I sang in the choir. One of the choir members came to me, arms wide open, big smile on her face, and said, "Happy Mother's Day, even though you're not a real mother." Just having a simple statement of someone telling me, because I'm a stepmother, I'm not a real mother. People just don't realize what they're saying and how their words impact and hurt others.
Guy Arcuri is a PhD who suffered for years as the son of an abusive mother. He's the author of Toxic Mothers, A Son's Guide to Healing and Moving On. How did he break the cycle of generational abuse?
I think at first I was clueless as a very young child, and then I tried to really change my mother, and then I realized I needed to learn how to love my mother and to heal myself. And so that's kind of what my book is about. It's about healing yourself to the point where you can learn that you're loving people well and how to love people well. And so I kind of took that route and was able to heal, yeah. But she had a tragic past. It was terrible.
And there's lots and lots of Stuff File news and, of course, an idiot of the day. The guest slater, the person who told you this was show number 0674, was photographer Tristan Brand, who is not only an amazing picture taker, but also an amazing human being. Tristan specializes in health, indigenous issues, forensic anthropology, and much, much more. You can go to his website, and you'll find his website as a link to our show this week on the number that you just heard him mention. See how it all comes around full circle? Thank you very much, Tristan, for doing the guest slate on this edition of the Stuff File program, a show that is listener-supported, fan-funded radio that depends on you for our success. Join us at patreon.com to help make this show an even bigger and better radio experience. Now, let's get right to the stuff. A woman was driving on Interstate 95 in Miami-Dade County, Florida, when two other vehicles sped past her while the occupants were shooting at each other. A bullet hit the woman's windshield and the flying glass lacerated her forehead. No other injuries were reported, and there was no other damage to the woman's Nissan Altima. But police are on the lookout for the people who were in the other two cars, a Mercedes-Benz and a Lamborghini. A Mercedes-Benz and a Lamborghini? Is this what happens when you run out of Grey Poupon?
Pardon me, would you have any Grey Poupon?
But of course. Farnsworth, I do believe that well-groomed man has driven off with that Grey Poupon.
Shall I chase him down, sir?
Fine idea.
Alfred, would you be so kind as to put the pedal to the metal?
Very good, sir.
Pardon me, but you mistakenly wandered off with my Grey Poupon!
No!
The scoundrel! I haven't yet added it to my pork loin!
The bell signifies that it's time for the Darwin File.
I am the Grim Reaper. I am death.
2 weeks ago on the show, we shared a couple of stories surrounding America's 4th of July and the dumb things people do with fireworks. Well, a couple more stories have crossed our desk, albeit late, and we just had to share them with you. First, 43-year-old Pablo Ruiz of San Antonio, Texas, did it in style. He put a professional mortar-style firework on his head and lit it. The resulting explosion literally blew Ruiz's brains out. He was still breathing when police arrived, but that didn't last long. Meanwhile, an unnamed man in Azusa, California, was lighting fireworks when one exploded. Said a witness, the guy had blood on his face and a chunk of his head missing. But the man was not only still conscious, he's expected to survive. Investigators are trying to figure out just what sort of fireworks the man was using. So let's just call him a Darwin Files starter kit. You know, when people say use your head, we don't mean for explosives. And although with these two stories the score is a 1-1 tie between life and the Grim Reaper, we must always remind you that the tree of life is often self-pruning.
I have come for you.
The annals of law enforcement in Florida now include a boat thief attempting to escape on a lawnmower. Okaloosa County deputies have finally nabbed a wanted man despite his attempts to evade them on a riding lawnmower. 40-year-old Dusty Mobley, who has previously dodged the law by vanishing into a swamp, was captured at a house in Holt, Florida. Mobley was wanted on warrants pertaining to a $40,000 boat stolen 6 months ago. As soon as Mobley saw law enforcement, he floored his John Deere riding lawnmower and attempted to flee the scene. Mobley was pursued, tased, and arrested for his efforts. He was found to have a revolver on his person, as well as a handcuff key and a pipe containing suspected meth residue. Back in January, authorities found Mobley on a stolen boat just days after it was taken and tried to speak to him at the time, but he jumped overboard and disappeared into the Florida swamp. He now faces several charges including grand theft of a vehicle, felony criminal mischief, 2 counts of resisting an officer, possession of a concealed weapon by a felon, carrying a concealed handcuff key, possession of drug paraphernalia, and felony failure to appear. Wow. Trying to evade cops while riding a John Deere. He's lucky that the cops just didn't mow him down.
Nothing runs like a deer.
Cops beg to differ. And finally, in this section of Stuff File News, before we get to our first guest here in this edition of the Stuff File program with me, Peter Anthony Holder, well, it's happened again. An American tourist at Mount Vesuvius near Naples, Italy, dropped his cell phone into the volcano's crater on July the 9th and then slid into the crater trying to retrieve it. 4 volcano guides lowered a rope 50 feet into the crater where 23-year-old Philip Carroll of Baltimore was in serious difficulty and pulled him out. After officials administered first aid, Carroll and 2 family members were cited by police for going off the authorized trail to snap a selfie. He suffered only abrasions and the humiliation of a trip to the police station. No word on how the phone fared. You know, it never ceases to amaze me, people endangering themselves in search of the perfect selfie. What more can we say?
Stupid! You're so stupid!
Yeah, that'll work. Anyway, let's get to our first guest here in this edition of the Stuff File program, shall we? This is the 3rd summer in the last 4 that we are speaking to prolific writer Humphrey Hawksley. He's a foreign correspondent for the BBC, who is also an espionage thriller writer. We first met him when we talked about his novel Man on Ice back in 2019. Then last year it was Man on Fire, and somewhere in between there, he also released Man on Edge. Well, the summer of 2022 adds another Major Rake Ozenna thriller to the canon. This one is called Ice Islands. Humphrey joins us once again via Skype from London. Hi, Humphrey.
Peter, so good to hear from you again. I really love our regular chats.
Nice to hear from you as well, too. I gotta ask, since you are so prolific, is this a symptom of the pandemic that we have been through, or have you always just written at this torrid pace, even though you have a busy life beyond writing?
I think it's because in my background I'm a journalist, a newsroom hack essentially, and I'm up against deadlines. And if I don't have a deadline, I tend to set myself one. And I think with publishers and doing sort of two jobs, you do the journalism and you do the publishing. The publishing world's very different. But they do have their deadlines, and I think, well, I'll try do one a year or one a year and a bit. And on the Rake Ozenna series, that seems to be what's happening.
Now, when it comes to writing these stories, again, being so prolific, are you the type of person who it just comes to you naturally? And do you have to focus on the story you're writing at the moment? And by that, I mean, do you ever come up with ideas and say, oh, I'm not going to use that here, but I'm going to put it in the next book?
I tend to come up with ideas for the thrillers of something that's sort of crossed my desk, and I'm never been quite sure what to do it journalistically. And then I will say, well, let's look into this a bit further. I mean, maybe there's some truth in it. Maybe there's a fiction story that could be done out of it. It's anchored in credibility because I do geopolitical, espionage, military type of thrillers. So there's got to be a credibility attached to it. And in this one, something did cross my desk. And I talked to a friend, actually, or a contact with the FBI, or they contacted me over something else. And they said, are you doing another thriller? And I said, yeah. They said, well, do you want some help with it? And I said, well, can you get me somebody that might know about this? And this happened to be a presidential executive order going back in 2011, an Obama-era order, where he named 4 types of organized crime groups that were a threat to American democracy. And I looked at this, and there was a Russian one, there was an Italian one, and there was a Latin American drug cartel one, which were all, grist to the mill. And then there was the Japanese Yakuza. And I thought, hold on a moment. Japan is meant to be America's closest ally and an example of great democracy in Asia. Why are they a threat? And that was what the premise of Ice Islands came to be, because I rang up or I got put in touch with an FBI agent who was a specialist in East Asia. And I said, I think you might be familiar with this, Peter, being in the same trade. I said, look, I've got this really crazy, wacky, stupid idea, but can I run it by you? And you can then tell me whether there's anything that I can do with it. And I said, well, I've got this crazy idea about Japanese organized crime being a threat to America. And he said, Humphrey, just stop that. He said, for my whole career, I've been trying to get the government to take notice of this problem.
Wow.
And then it's sort of, we talked for about 90 minutes on this secure, encrypted, coded line or whatever they'd set me up with, because it was the height of the pandemic. We couldn't meet. And I took the notes of it. I took it down. And then I based Ice Islands around. I mean, it was, that conversation plus many others after.
So we know that the Yakuza is involved in this particular story. What is the story of Ice Islands?
The story of Ice Islands is that Rake Ozenna, who has been my hero throughout this, and he comes from Little Diomede, which is the island, the Alaskan island, right on the Russian border. So he's a tough guy. He's a wild man. He's used to inhospitable terrains, cold weather. And he's he's a major, technically a major in the Alaska National Guard. And from that, he had been deployed to Syria and Iraq and Afghanistan and places like that. So he's got all that metal plus the Alaskan Little Diomede element to him. But in this case, it begins on the Åland Islands, which is in the Baltic Sea, in the middle of winter. And he is sent there to try to win the trust of a rejected daughter from Japan's most powerful crime family. And at the same time, there's a murder on these islands. And I should say that the Åland Island itself is the Åland Islands is very interesting because it's between Finland and Sweden. And after the First World War in the 1920s, it was the flashpoint for another regional or global war because it's predominantly Swedish, but it's Finnish territory. And the British brokered a peace there, which holds today. And they have a peace institute there, which is about conflict resolution. So I set this scene where all of these characters from various conflicts, like Sunni Shia from Iraq and Protestant Catholic from Northern Ireland and Palestinian Israeli, and I even had the left and the right in the US, came there for a conference. And then there was the Russia-Japan element of it because of a little-known dispute up between Russia and Japan, which is where the daughter, the rejected daughter of the crime family, and a Russian delegate was there. And the Russian delegate gets murdered, and then mayhem and chase and hunt begins there because Rake Ozenna has to keep Sarah Cato, the rejected daughter of the crime family, safe. And she is his into that family to find out what is going wrong.
I know I asked you this one of the last times we chatted, but since you are a foreign correspondent with the BBC and you also write these thrillers, you have to walk this fine line between fact and fiction and dealing with the people you have to deal with in your so-called day job with the BBC. And the reason why I bring it up again is we all know that the Russians can hold a grudge, and they're more of a pariah in world society now, what with what's going on in the Ukraine, than they were when I last spoke to you. So I'm just wondering if you hear anything through back channels about complaints of characters or scenes that you've written in either current or past books, and does it make you think when you're writing in the future when you talk about Russia?
Well, that's a fascinating, tightrope question there. I have been, technically speaking, although I work for them, I've been off BBC staff, as it were, and this is what they would say if something happened for some years now, so only on contract. And in Moscow, we have very good, our Moscow editor, who is technically under these dreadful new laws that came in February or March, early March, whereby if you say something wrong, you can get jailed for 15 years. It's not just getting expelled from the country, it's being thrown into prison in the country. And as you say, Peter, I mean, since we last spoke, the world has sort of been turned upside down in a way, because all of the material that a thriller writer can write about projecting what might happen has in fact happened. You've had a sovereign country, sovereign European country invaded by a nuclear power that is threatening nuclear war. You've got a massive sanctions on Russia that, unimaginable even a year ago. And from all that, you've now got the rising fuel and food prices, warnings of famine in the developing world, and all of the sort of dystopian catastrophes that we dream up as thriller writers. And I think it is very different. But just to on your point, which is about the journalism and sort of upsetting the Russians when you're writing in that, in my experience, and I've written a lot about the Chinese as well and other things, is that they rather like it because they are, in fact, the villains and the heroes of their own stories. So they separate it off in a way from the journalism. And then there's the thriller writing. And I did a book, many years ago called Dragon Strike, which was about China starting a war with America in the South China Sea. I then happened to be the Beijing correspondent for the Beijing bureau chief for the BBC. The people that I was dealing with pulled me in and said, "You don't really think we're this violent as a country?" The Chinese sort of minder said. And I said, "No, but it's a fiction." He said, "Yes, but I just want to tell you my bosses love it because you make us far more powerful than we really are."
Well, I'm sure the bosses loved it. I'm sure maybe even the Russians love it. And I'm sure when it comes to the current book, your readers will love it because, again, you're very, very successful, very prolific. And while you put them out very, very quickly, I'm sure there's a lot of people who still can't wait for when the next one comes out. The current one, the one that's just out, is called Ice Islands. And Humphrey, I thank you once again for being on the program with us.
Well, thank you, Peter, for having me. I always enjoy our conversations with you in Montreal. We often have some back chats, don't we, afterwards to exchange views.
Humphrey Hawksley, author of Ice Islands. You can go to my website at thestuffile.com, check out the show for this number, which is show number 0674, and you'll find links to Humphrey's site, plus links to either Amazon.com or Amazon.ca, where you can order his book directly. You're listening to the Stuff File program with me, Peter Anthony Holder.
There's still more guests, more news, and an idiot of the day coming your way on the Stuff File program. Stay tuned. The Stuff File program is a listener-supported, fan-funded radio show that depends on you for our success. Join us at patreon.com to help make this show an even bigger and better radio experience. Sign up and find out about our rewards program. Being a patron doesn't have to be a long-term commitment. There's absolutely no obligation. You could join today and end whenever you'd like. But the time we have your support would be so greatly appreciated. We'd also love to hear your thoughts about the show and even your ideas for rewards. Join us for the ride. Join us at patreon.com/thestuffileprogram. You're listening to the Stuff File program with Peter Anthony Holder, a show that is sanitized for your protection.
And still to come on the program, we will talk to Frances Jones, the author of Overcoming the Emotional Stigmas of Infertility, Barren But Not Ashamed. And also, we'll talk to the author of Toxic Mothers, A Son's Guide to Healing and Moving On. We also have much more in Stuff File news and, of course, an idiot of the day coming your way. So stay tuned for all of that. Let's get back to the stuff right here, right now. Now, last week we had 13-year-old Christian Gnier on the show. He's one of the stars of the season 4 of the smash Netflix hit Stranger Things. You can go back to Stuff File program number 0673 if you missed it. I, like so many, have binge-watched it. Great series. Many people seem to be talking about those deadly flying demo bats. To us Canadians, they're nothing new or terrifying. We've had them here for years. We call them shadflies. Anyway, I bring all of this up to bring you this next story. Thanks to the quick reaction of a semi-truck driver, a teenage driver sustained only minor injuries after she allowed her car to drift into the oncoming lane of a suburban Minneapolis street and crash into the trailer. During questioning after the mid-July incident, the girl denied being on her phone at the time of the crash, but Anoka County Sheriff's deputies noticed that her car's Bluetooth system was still streaming the audio to Stranger Things on Netflix. She then admitted to watching the popular series while driving. Not the brightest thing to do. I'm sure Vecna has a few choice words for this kind of action.
You've broken
Everything you're suffering is almost at an end.
Yes. Still on the road, here's a story from Wales. 42-year-old Laurie Rosser was stopped while driving on the M4 on June 26th because his van was missing 2 tires. Police estimated he had driven more than 10 miles without the tires. Rosser was breathalyzed at the scene, where he tested at more than twice the legal limit. But he had a different explanation for his oversight. His solicitor, Rhys Davies, said he had tested positive for COVID and his mind was cloudy. That influenced his decision to drive with 2 defective tires on the vehicle. Well, regardless of what his legal representative had to say, Rosser was banned from driving for 17 months and fined. So, because of COVID, he was too tired to put on 2 tires. Not buying it. Meanwhile, in Ireland, 2 men have appeared before Carlow Circuit Criminal Court charged with deception and fraud of a post office in January involving the pension of a deceased senior. 40-year-old Declan Hawnie allegedly took the body of his dead uncle, 66-year-old Peter Doyle, to a nearby post office to claim his pension payment. So basically, they weekend at Bernied him.
Why do these things always happen to me? What kind of a host invites you to his house for the weekend and dies on you?
The defendant was further charged with attempted deception and of attempted theft. Hawnie is also accused of entering the post office at 11:04 a.m. on a Friday, where he dishonestly induced by deception a member of the staff. He's in custody despite bail being granted previously. His friend was charged with attempting to steal Doyle's state pension to the sum of €246. The authorities' investigation has so far shown the pensioner did not die suddenly at the post office. Officers have also established evidence that Doyle was alive earlier that morning. A post-mortem has determined that there was no foul play in Doyle's death. So basically, he died early Friday morning, the day his pension was due. Such bad luck for the nephew.
I don't understand why he couldn't wait until Monday.
Yep, them's the breaks. And finally, in this section of Stuff File News, before we get to our next guest here in this edition of the Stuff File program with me, Peter Anthony Holder, 74-year-old former vicar John Jeffs was found guilty on July 13th in Northampton Magistrates Court in England in an incident that happened in September of 2020. A churchgoer at the Baptist Center in Middleton Cheney came upon Jeffs as he stood between 2 chairs wearing only ladies' stockings and being intimate with a Hoover vacuum hose.
Hoover's exclusive, it beats as it sweeps as it cleans action.
Yes, it does. Although Jeffs saw the onlooker, he reportedly continued thrusting toward the Hoover, which is known for its powerful suction.
Terrific suction power. Yes, the Hoover Constellation Cleaner has such terrific suction power, it glides on a cushion of air. For terrific suction power, the Hoover Constellation.
Jeffs was fined about $1,000 and added to the sex offender registry. He also was ordered to pay about $240 to the person who witnessed the act. You know, I'm just curious. What does it mean to be on the sex offender registry for having sex with a vacuum cleaner? Does that mean you can't be within a certain distance from people or within a certain distance from vacuum cleaners? If it's the latter, Vicar Jeffs will surely miss his Hoover.
Hoover, nobody does it like you.
Anyway, let's get to our next guest here in this edition of the Stuff All program, shall we? If you have never grappled with infertility, you may wonder why infertile couples don't simply adopt a child. You may even think that it's okay to suggest this to couples who share their infertility issue with you. But as Francis Jones will tell you, the suggestion that such couples adopt may be considered insulting or insensitive. Francis is the author of Overcoming the Emotional Stigmas of Infertility, Barren But Not Ashamed. She joins us via Zoom from Memphis. Hi, Francis.
Hi, how are you?
I'm just tickety-boo. Thanks very much for being on the program with us. That insensitive question, I guess it's really right up there with another very insensitive question, and that is when a couple have a miscarriage and somebody says, oh, just go ahead and have another one.
Yes, you're absolutely right. I believe that people have good intentions, but they don't realize the impact that their words are having on a person who's going through infertility. And being able to shed light to that will bring healing to those who are involved.
And this is an issue that's not just something or statements that are made by people who are acquaintances. These can be family members, close relatives who will say these things, not realizing necessarily how insensitive and hurtful it can be.
Yes, you're absolutely right, which reminds me of a story. When my husband and I first married, he had a 4.5-year-old daughter. So when I married him, I became an instant full-time mom. A few months later, our first Mother's Day, I'm all excited. We're at church and I sang in the choir. And after church services, one of the choir members came to me, arms wide open, big smile on her face, and said, "Happy Mother's Day, even though you're not a real mother." Now, at that time, I had no idea that I was going to be impacted by infertility. But just having a simple statement of someone telling me because I'm a stepmother, I'm not a real mother. People just don't realize what they're saying and how their words impact and hurt others.
Now, the title of your book is Overcoming the Emotional Stigmas of Infertility, and I'm assuming that before you could write such a book, this is something you had to go through yourself. So what was the deepest, darkest, longest period that you had to go through, that you had to overcome to reach where you are today?
Well, my book is a 20-year journey, over 20-year journey of my never being able to have children. And one of the hardest things for me is I came from a very fertile family. My mother, she conceived 10 times. She had another sister that conceived 10, another that conceived 7. All of my sisters have children. Even today, all of my adult nieces, with the exception of one, have children. And so my having a desire to bring 5 children into the world and then found out I could not conceive not once, that was darkness for me because I blamed myself. I thought I had done something wrong. I thought that I deserved to be barren. I thought barrenness was a curse for me. And what brought me to a point of understanding was realizing that it was simply a part of my body that wasn't operating as it should. I did nothing to cause it. But being able to write the book, I realized after I came out of that darkness that there were others who were yet suffering with that heartache and with that hurt. And I felt so compelled to write this book. Initially, I was planning on writing a book, but it was going to be a fictional love story. But because of the desire and the need of those who are yet going through, I put all of that aside and did something I don't normally do because I'm a very private person. I took all of my heartache, all of my pain, all of my suffering, so to speak, and I share it, transparently with others. People are afraid sometimes to share because they don't want to be judged. But I put all that aside just so others can be able to find hope.
When it comes to infertile couples, of course, it's a bit of a two-way street. It's not just a woman who cannot conceive. It is also, in some cases, a man who cannot produce literally the seed that will cause conception. So from that perspective, was there any difficulty in your marriage at the time it was discovered that as a couple you would not be able to have children? Because sometimes there is blame on either party in the relationship when something like this is discovered.
Well, you're absolutely right in the sense where, infertility is just not something that impacts the woman. A lot of people think it's a woman's problem. But according to statistics, 1 in 8 couples are impacted with infertility. 1/3 of those couples are female related, 1/3 is male related, and 1/3 is either the female or the male or unexplained. And so looking at that, as it came to my household, my husband was very supportive. He had, like I mentioned, a daughter from his first marriage. But prior to him even conceiving, having birthed that child, he was diagnosed with some type of prostate infection. And the doctors told him he would never be able to have children, but yet he was. And so he was so supportive of me because he knew how important it was for me to bring forth life, to build our family. And he did not have any anguish towards me. He understood how important it was for me to bring forth a child. And so he was very supportive. He went through all of the different treatments with me. He got himself checked just to make sure that there was no issues on his part. And he held my hand every step of the way. I have a great guy and I'm thankful for him. But everybody's not, as fortunate. And unfortunately, many couples actually divorce because one or the other can't have children. It's a hard situation to deal with.
Coming through this on the other side, you've written this book, again, Overcoming the Emotional Stigmas of Infertility, Barren But Not Ashamed. Was writing this book part of your healing process? Was it cathartic for you to share your story for others and then relive it, I guess, from almost a third-party personality to share your story with others?
Yes, it was. One thing about it, when I was going through infertility, I lost myself. I forgot who I was. I forgot that I was special. And I had to go on a self-discovery journey. Part of that discovery journey was writing the book because I had to go back and face all of that all over again. But it was so freeing for me because this time I wasn't going back as a victim. I was going back as someone who's out to rescue somebody else. So when I went down the roads and saw the pain that I went through, it sometimes brought tears because, memories are just memories. But the simple fact that I knew that there was such a great purpose in what I was doing, I put all of that aside. Yes, it healed me, and I'm hoping it heals others.
In writing the book, have you had any contact with any of the people, either in your past, in your family, friends, who would have said some of those insensitive things that I, mentioned in the introduction?
Sometimes, yes. I have a sister as an example, one of the sweetest people in the world. And so she knew that it's important for me to be able to conceive. She knew that. And sometimes she would come and she would ask me questions like, oh, do you think my kids look like me? Or do you think my grandchildren look like me? And in order to try to compensate for me not having anyone in my family line, so to speak, to look like me, she would say, well, oh, you look like your nieces. Not realizing that doesn't fix the situation. Sometimes it's better if you don't know what to say, ask an individual, how can I support you? How do you need me to be there for you? So as far as the person that said that to me in church, I haven't seen her since. But I come across people all the time who are dealing with those that I coach, those that I support in infertility support groups. I help them with my experience.
Just the title of the book alone, I'm sure it's a book that many a woman would gravitate to, whether they're someone who has dealt with infertility or not. But do you find that there are men who are interested in reading your book and finding out what's going on and therefore being able to be more supportive?
Yes, I've had several men to buy my book and have told me how helpful that it is. I've spoken with men who said that, their wife were going through so many hardships and that, yes, my book has helped. So it's all about building the family line, building the support line to help those who are dealing with infertility. Now, the hardest part about that is many of us don't talk about it. So if you don't really actively know that a person is dealing with infertility, you could be saying things that's very insensitive because you don't know, they haven't shared that. But my advice is this, it's just to be aware that if you know someone that always have talked about having children and for some reason that they don't, have a consideration. We talk about diversity and inclusiveness, but all around the workplace and even just in everyday life, people are bragging about their families. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that, but they don't realize that the person in the cubicle right next to you could be dealing with infertility. My book is catered to bring awareness to those who've never suffered with infertility. It's also geared to help those who are dealing with that crisis in their life and don't know how to deal with it. So it's all about being aware of what you're saying, being aware of the person.
Well, those who have come to peace with it, as you say, like obviously you have, the last part of your title is Barren But Not Ashamed.
Yes.
Have you come to peace with the idea that you won't be able to have a child?
Yes, I have come to peace with that because, like I said, I thought that there was something wrong with me, and I couldn't find purpose in why I was going through what I was going through. But I realized that my situation was not just about me. There was a greater purpose in mind. It was to serve the humanity. And when I began to put the pieces together and found out that having a child did not make me whole, it did not make me special, it did not necessarily guarantee a happy life, then I began to realize that infertility wasn't what really caused my heartache. It was how I valued myself. And I began to value myself again. I found Francis and I found joy again.
The book is called Overcoming the Emotional Stigmas of Infertility, Barren But Not Ashamed. Francis, thank you very, very much for taking the time to be on the program with us.
And thank you so much for having me.
Francis Jones, author of Overcoming the Emotional Stigmas of Infertility, Barren But Not Ashamed. You can go to my website at thestuffwile.com to the page for this show, which is show number 0674, and you'll find links to Francis's site, plus links to either Amazon.com or Amazon.ca, where you can order her book directly. You're listening to the Stuff File program with me, Peter Anthony Holder.
Got something for the mailbag? Drop Peter a line. He'd love to hear from you. Send your email to mailbag@thestufffile.com. And remember, stuff is spelled S-T-U-P-H. That's mailbag@thestufffile.com. Or catch up with him on Twitter or Facebook. There's more Stuff File coming your way in just a few moments.
Here's a brief word about our show and my book. If you become a regular Patreon patron of the Stuff File program, I'll give you an e-version of my book, Great Conversations, My Interviews with Two Men on the Moon and a Galaxy of Stars. It's easy to do. Just go to patreon.com and become a patron to help make this show an even bigger and better radio experience. So, join Patreon and claim your copy of Great Conversations, My Interviews with Two Men on the Moon and a Galaxy of Stars. Sign up at patreon.com/The Stuff File program.
You're listening to the Stuff File program with Peter Anthony Holder. It's way more fun and a lot healthier than licking all the buttons on an elevator.
And still to come, we'll talk about toxic mothers. We also have an idiot of the day coming your way, but I've got one more Stuff File news story to share with you right here, right now. In Ann Arbor, Michigan, a serial pharmacy robber identified as 37-year-old Christopher Kukola allegedly hit 5 CVS stores between May and July, demanding narcotics and displaying a gun. In the latest incident on July 7th, a fast-thinking pharmacist dropped a decoy pill bottle containing a GPS tracker into the bag. Police found Kukola escaping in a Jeep and followed the car to an apartment complex where the thief jumped out and tried to flee on foot. When officers caught up to him, Kukola told them, "The guy you're looking for ran that way." Yeah, right. Investigators found a BB gun and drugs and the decoy bottle in his Jeep. He was indicted on federal charges. So basically, he'll be getting what's prescribed for him. Anyway, let's get to our last guest here in this edition of the Stuff File program, shall we? Guy Arcuri is a PhD who suffered for years as the son of a verbally, mentally, and emotionally abusive mother. He's now a married father of 2 who trains other people to heal themselves. He's also the author of Toxic Mothers, A Son's Guide to Healing and Moving On. Guy joins us via Zoom from North Carolina. Hi, Guy.
Hello, Peter. How are you?
Just tickety-boo. Thanks very much for being on the program with us. There is so much to unpack here in this story, and we have so little time, so I want to get right to it. You, in a period of, I guess it was about 9 years, lost your sister, your father, your mother, your brother, correct?
That's correct. I'm an orphan.
Okay. So I'm just wondering if you coming out of being under the thumb of a mentally and emotionally abusive mother was just a product of lasting longer than anyone else in your family.
Laughter is a huge part. You got to heal with humor. It's in my book. You can read. You got to heal with humor. But my mother knew what was going on, and I told her I was writing the book because I had healed enough to really talk to her about it. But we had a lot of laughs her last 6 months of life. Yes.
But you're just last man standing. Was that part of the situation of you successfully healing yourself? The fact that you didn't have the pressures of those around you anymore?
Yeah, I left home pretty early and got married very young, and I'm still married. And so I really was able to create my own healing and to really work hard at it. So yes.
An abusive situation is something that often is generational. I'm guessing that one of the reasons your mother was the way she was is she was probably raised that way. So how did you break the cycle?
I think at first I was clueless as a very young child, and then I tried to really change my mother, and then I realized I needed to learn how to love my mother and to heal myself. And so that's kind of what my book is about. It's about healing yourself to the point where you can learn that you're loving people well and how to love people well. And so I kind of took that route and was able to heal, yeah. But she had a tragic past. It was terrible, yes.
How much of what went on in your childhood was something that you initially blamed yourself for? And if that was the case, how did you eradicate that situation?
Well, I think we all as human beings, in my book, I had this idea called rules to live by. And when we're not aware of the rules to live by, we either take on the rules of other people or we create our own subconsciously, and you become really toxic, but you also become very hard on yourself. So the way that I realized I had become toxic just by trying not to be toxic was when I started being really mean to my wife and really didn't know how to get along with others well, and I really needed help. So I went and got it. Yeah.
And that's a situation that a lot of people don't follow through on. And by that, I mean, they don't get the help that they need. They figure they can either self-help or in some cases self-medicate.
Exactly. I have these concepts called insulating and isolating behavior, and we all do it, but men especially do it really strongly. They insulate themselves with people who don't challenge them and what they're doing, and they isolate themselves to say it's all up to me and I don't want anyone's input into my life, instead of going after some help that is out there for them. Yeah.
Even though you realize the situation that you were living in with your mother, and as you say, you left when you were 18 years old, were you still somewhere in the back of your mind trying to get your mother's attention or acceptance or love?
Yeah, I think it's the curse of a son that we don't want to disrespect our mother. She gave us life. She raised us. My mother had very, very tender and loving moments in raising me, but she was left unchecked and I was left unchecked. And so it really devolved into terrible things. But I tried my hardest to overcome those, let's say, as I left.
You said that laughter was one of the things that helped keep your sanity. Would you consider yourself a humorous person? And considering the background that you're coming from, would you say you're a fan of, for lack of a better term, dark humor?
You know, my children and my wife hate my humor. But when you've had a heart attack and you've lived through all these things, and I've had a heart attack too, you just kind of realize that life's way too short. So they don't like me joking about, you know, our mortality or things like that. But you got to find humor in even the demands that your toxic person is placing on you, because they are completely irrational. And if you can't laugh at that, it's going to take hold of you and change you for the worse.
Okay, so this is something you teach. You're a PhD. You say that humor is very important. And you also say that your family, your current family, isn't really fond of your humor. So is this a situation where, the cobbler's children go without shoes, that you can't seem to get your point across to the way one should mentally prepare for a life by doing the things that you did or that you espouse in your book?
Well, I think that my wife and I are guilty of really privileging and spoiling our children. My whole life in my book, you can see my mother hated wealthy people, and she instilled that in me. I had a terribly lower middle class life, and when I tell my stories to my children, they say, I don't want to hear it. And I'm trying to tell them for the humor factor that my children are worried that their car radio doesn't work when I didn't have a car growing up at all. And so things like that are humorous, but they don't want to hear it.
You walk to school through snow, uphill every day.
Snow, yeah. Exactly, yeah.
Before your mother died, were you able to make peace with her, or did you always have this animosity, this battle going on between the two of you?
It was a beautiful thing. My sister and my father had died, and it was just my older brother and I and my mother. But my brother had really, really serious alcohol problems, and he and my mother were estranged. And so when she found out she was terminally ill, she came to me and said, would you be my caregiver as I decline and die? And I said, immediately, yes, because I knew I had healed enough not to jump into her world and get sucked in. I call it Hazel World. My brother and I called it Hazel World. Her name was Hazel. And I knew I didn't have to do that. And so those last 6 months were really sweet. We reconciled, we laughed, and we cried, and it was kind of what a relationship should be about. But I think the impending death kind of made her give up the control of some of the things she was holding so tightly to.
As you say, your mother was emotionally and mentally abusive. You had a brother and a sister, but you also had a father. What was her relationship in their marriage? Was she abusive to her husband as well?
Well, yes, in my opinion. My father chose to die, and we had a very great and lengthy conversation about this. But he was unfaithful to my mother, and they chose to stay together. But he became very passive because she became very manipulative. We saw it all by the time that had all transpired. I was about 14 or 13 years old. And so we all got it. I'm the youngest. We all got what my mother was doing, and she made his life miserable. I mean, miserable for the last, 50 years of his life.
But he did stay nonetheless.
He did. And from that point on, the thing that I really took away from him is that he loved us. He was afraid to show it. I don't think he was taught. And that's another reason why I meet with guys and do men's retreats, so that I can help people know if they're loving others. But I think he also told me the truth from that point on. And my mother never, when I say never, almost never told me the truth about anything. And so we as children were just left guessing and at her beck and call and whim and caprice. It was terrible.
You mentioned that she made your father's life miserable through the course of the marriage. Hindsight's always 20/20. The fact that she was verbally, mentally, and emotionally abusive. Do you think this is a situation where she found someone that she could do that to as a mate?
Yes, I think he stuck to his own, but he worked hard and he kept his distance. And I think that really frustrated her as well. So I think she made his life miserable because of the lack of forgiveness. If she had forgiven him, she would have really wanted him to experience joys in life. And she just didn't allow that. And it was sad. It was very sad that she didn't do that. And I took it upon myself, just because I had healed, to give my dad moments of joy for the rest of his life. It was very sweet.
How old are your daughters?
I have a daughter who's 26. I have a son who's 23.
And you have a son and a daughter. Sorry. And
yes.
And have they read your book?
My son cracks up at it. Yeah, he's read it. She has not. She doesn't like hearing my stories. I think she feels like she judges herself as being too, privileged or have such an easy life. But the fact is, dysfunction happens. But it's up to us to take control and learn how to deal with it. And the litmus test is whether or not we're loving others well. And so I've taught them growing up what it means to love others well and what it means when you don't love others well and what you need to do about it. But she doesn't like hearing, she knows lots of the stories.
It's a fascinating topic. The book is Toxic Mothers, A Son's Guide to Healing and Moving On. Guy, I thank you very much for taking the time to be on the program with us.
Thanks so much, Peter. You're an awesome radio host. It's amazing.
Guy Arcuri, author of Toxic Mothers, A Son's Guide to Healing and Moving On. You can go to my website at thestufffile.com to the page for this show, which is show number 0674, and you'll find links to Guy's site, plus links to either Amazon.com or Amazon.ca, where you can order his book directly. You're listening to the Stuff File program with me, Peter Anthony Holder. It's time now for the Idiot of the Day.
And now it's time for the Strange Things Adults Do. The Stuff File presents the Idiot of the Day.
Wanted for multiple felonies, 27-year-old Billy Sloan was at a Chatham County, Georgia gas station in an allegedly stolen car when police caught up with him. When an officer approached, Sloan sped off. With the officers in pursuit, Sloan ditched the car and ran away on foot. The chase ended at the Al Henderson Golf Course, where Sloan jumped into a pond with 2 alligators, one of which immediately began circling him. Officers hovered a helicopter over the pond to scare the gators away. Sloan still refused to come out, and after an hour-long standoff, police used an amphibious vehicle to fetch him and arrest him. Now, let me get this straight. Although the police are trying to arrest you, they are also trying to save you from being a gator tot. But you choose to stay in the water for an hour-long standoff? Why? Oh, why would you take such a chance in alligator-infested water? One reason, and one reason only. You're an idiot!
Gee, I'm only a kid, but even I know you're an idiot.
And that's it for this edition of the Stuff File program number 0674. Hope you enjoyed it. The website is thestufffile.com, and once again, stuff is spelled S-T-U-P-H, where you'll find information and links on all of our guests by going to the weekly Stuff File page. Just look for the corresponding program number, and once again, that's 0674. Email me at peter@thestufffile.com. You can also find me on Facebook and Twitter as PA Holder, and don't forget to check us out on patreon.com, where you can become a patron of the program. Hope to see you back here for our next show on the air, online, or as a download. We're coming to you from everywhere, including kdxradio.com, truetalkradio.com, streaming on Audible, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Amazon Music, Spotify, Stitcher, and iHeartRadio, and over the air on World FM in New Zealand, MediaCore in Singapore, WLSLLP-FM in Dade City, Florida, CKUW-FM in Winnipeg, CFMU in Hamilton, CKLU in Sudbury, and local 107.3 FM in St. John. That's it. Bye-bye.
You've been listening to the Stuff File program with Peter Anthony Holder, a presentation of Flying Fish Communications. Peter is a man who came from very meager beginnings, and he's continued to go downhill from there.